All right, let's get right into it. What if just about everything you learned about money in school was, well, wrong? That's the big, bold question at the heart of one of the most popular personal finance books ever, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Today, we're going to break down the core ideas from this book that totally flipped how millions of people think about getting rich. And this quote right here, this is the central idea. Kiyosaki basically says that schools are great at training us to be really good employees, but they're terrible at teaching us how to be wealthy. Think about it. We learn how to work for our money, but does anyone ever teach us how to make our money work for us? That simple switch in thinking is what this entire book is about. So, how does he get these lessons across? Well, he uses this simple but really powerful story from his own childhood, growing up with two very different father figures. And you guessed it, each one had a completely different philosophy on money. On one side, you've got his actual dad, who he calls Poor Dad. Now, this guy was brilliant, a PhD, a high-ranking government official who believed in the classic path: get great grades, land a safe, secure job with benefits. Then you have his best friend's father, Rich Dad, who was an entrepreneur that dropped out after the 8th grade, but ended up becoming one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. I mean, you can't make that up. The contrast is just, wow. And you can bet their advice was polar opposite. His poor dad would always say, the love of money is the root of all evil. But Rich Dad, he'd fire back, the lack of money is the root of all evil. Poor Dad's mantra was to play it safe, don't take risks. Rich Dad's was, you have to learn to manage risk. And it was this constant tug-of-war of ideas that made a young Kiyosaki really think for himself and decide which path he was going to follow. So what was the very first big lesson Rich Dad taught him? It's a total game changer, and it's this. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. And the way he taught this, it's quite a story. It all started when 9-year-old Robert and his buddy Mike asked Rich Dad to teach them how to get rich. So Rich Dad gives them a job in one of his stores. Their task? Dusting canned goods for hours on end. And the pay? A measly 10 cents an hour. I mean, it was grueling, boring work, and that super low pay, that was totally on purpose. It was designed to make them angry. So why the horrible job? Rich Dad wanted them to get a little taste of what he called the rat race. He explained that most people's financial lives are run by two emotions, fear and greed. The fear of not having enough money to pay the bills. That keeps you waking up and going to a job you might not even like. And then when you get that paycheck, greed kicks in, and you start dreaming of all the cool stuff you can buy. And that cycle, fear, work, greed, spend, is the trap that keeps people stuck. After a few weeks of this, Kiyosaki had had enough and marched in to demand a raise. And Rich Dad's response was a bombshell. He cut their pay to zero. Nothing. But this wasn't about being cruel. This was the real lesson. By forcing them to work for free, he was pushing them to stop thinking like employees who just wait for a bigger paycheck. He wanted them to open their eyes and start spotting opportunities that were right in front of them. And you know what? It actually worked. One day, they saw the store owner tossing out old, unsold comic books, and bam, a light bulb went off. They asked if they could have them, and they started up their own little business, a comic book library in Mike's basement. They charged other kids 10 cents for admission, and just like that, they had a business that was making them money even when they weren't physically there. That was their very first lesson in making money work for them. Now, that first experience with the comic books, it sets up what is probably the single most important lesson in the entire book. You have to get smart about money, what he calls financial literacy. According to Rich Dad, the whole game of building wealth comes down to one simple rule, just one. And he says that most people struggle their whole lives simply because they never really grasp this one fundamental idea. Rich Dad just slices through all the confusing financial talk with a super simple definition. It's all about cash flow. An asset, he says, is anything that puts money in your pocket, period. And on the flip side, a liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket. That's it. It's that simple. And that's the lens you're supposed to use for every single financial choice you make. Just ask yourself, is this going to make money flow toward me or away from me? Okay, so let's see what this actually looks like. For a poor person, cash flow is basically a one-way street. Money comes in from their job, and it goes right back out to cover all the essential expenses: taxes, rent, food, you name it. There's nothing left at the end of the month to buy any assets. Now, the middle class pattern looks a little more complicated, but it's really just a more elaborate version of the same trap. Income comes in, but it gets funneled into paying for liabilities that they often think are assets. Things like a mortgage, car payments, student loans, credit card debt. This is what keeps them running in that rat race, working harder and harder just to keep up with all the things they own that are costing them money.
But the cash flow pattern of the rich, it is completely different. They use their income to do one thing: buy assets. Things like rental properties, stocks, bonds, businesses. And those assets then generate more income, which they use to pay their bills and to buy even more assets. It becomes this amazing, self-perpetuating cycle of wealth building.
And this really unique way of looking at everything through the lens of cash flow, it leads to one of the book's most famous and controversial claims. It's one that goes right after a core belief of the middle class. Kiyosaki loves to ask this question to just completely shatter our conventional thinking. I mean, for generations, what have we been told? Your home is your biggest investment. It's your greatest asset. But if we use Rich Dad's simple definitions, is that actually true? Well, according to Rich Dad, the answer is a hard no. Your personal residence is a liability, not an asset. And why? Simple. It constantly takes money out of your pocket. Think about it. You have the mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance. Money is always flowing out. It doesn't put a single dollar in your pocket, it just consumes your income. So if the goal is to buy assets, where should you be focusing your time and energy? Well, that brings us to the final big lesson from the book, Mind Your Own Business. There's a fantastic story in the book about Ray Kroc, the guy who built McDonald's into a global empire. He once asked a group of business students, "What business am I in?" They all said, "The hamburger business, of course." And he said, "Nope, I'm not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate." You see, his profession was selling hamburger franchises, but his business, the thing that actually made him incredibly wealthy, was accumulating the valuable real estate underneath every single one of those golden arches. That's the difference between your job and your business. And this quote right here just sums it all up. This is the big mindset shift the book is trying to get across. Most people are totally focused on their income statements, their paycheck. They're always thinking, how can I get a raise? But the rich, they focus on their asset column. They're always thinking, what assets can I buy? See, your job pays your bills today, but it's your business, your collection of income-producing assets, that's going to build your wealth for tomorrow. When you boil it all down, Rich Dad Poor Dad is really just trying to get you to push aside all that traditional financial advice and take a hard, honest look at your own life with this one simple question. It's not about how big your paycheck is. It's about what you own that makes you money. So the real question is, what's in your asset column?